I'm Angie Torrey, and today I'm going to talk about all the different ways to provide comprehensible input to your students. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about myself, so you're not wondering, why should we listen to her? I taught Spanish and French for 31 years, Spanish most of that time. For a few years, both. That got a little confusing. And I took my students from level 1 all the way to AP Spanish. The AP Spanish students, all of them passed, except for one, in the 5 years that I taught AP Spanish. I have been a TPT seller for 13 years. When I was first a teacher, I was so surprised that I didn't have the resources I needed to provide comprehensible input to my students. So I created them. It took a long, long time. I created the TPR stories and the videos because there just weren't any. And then I thought, well, if I need them, other people probably need them. So that's why I started offering them on Teachers Pay Teachers. So let's get right to it. How do you use comprehensible input in your classroom? Well, why? Let's start with why do you want to use it? Well, because that's how one acquires a language. And when I was first teaching, I heard in order to be able to produce or have a word or phrase become part of your working vocabulary, you had to hear it or see it 71 times. Well, now I see that they're saying 17 times you have to be exposed to it. I'm like, whoa, did they get the numbers mixed up? But in any case, it's a lot of times. And our primary responsibility as teachers is to provide that comprehensible input to students so they get the repetition in context. And so we're going to start with the definition. What is comprehensible input? If I have to provide it to my students, if I have to incorporate it into my lesson plans, what is it? So I'm just going to read the definition that I have on my blog post here, and I will be providing this link and many other links to you. Let's see, so comprehensible input, what is it? It is spoken or written language, usually in context of a sentence, in meaningful messages, and that is understood, the language is understood by students, it is only slightly above their understanding. So slightly above, in other words, if a student comes into your classroom and they understand everything except for 1 or 2 words here and there, then they're going to acquire those words that they don't know. But if they come into your Spanish 2 class, that's a topic for a completely different workshop. I've written a blog post on the challenges of teaching level 2 because there are so many different levels of proficiency in one class. And so one student will be understanding everything you say, and another student will hear brrr, because maybe last year they didn't have a teacher or the teacher spoke mostly English. And so they're hearing most of what you understand, they don't understand. They can only get a word here or there that they can understand. And so they're not able to acquire the language. The brain just won't do it. And the other component is compelling. It must be compelling. Well, that means it should be interesting. And because it's hard enough to listen in your own language, but to listen and focus in another language, something that's not interesting, it will be really hard to acquire. So we're going to see how can we make things interesting and how can we provide comprehensible input. And I'm going to give you 13 different ways that I have done it. Every strategy or activity that I'm going to share today, I've used in my classrooms, so they're all kid tested. So I'm going to start first with commands. I always start with commands because once the students have heard those verbs, then every time they hear them thereafter, they'll understand them. It doesn't matter how they're conjugated. They could all be conjugated differently, but they will get the meaning. And so I'm laying a foundation for going to 90 to 100% in the target language by starting out with the commands. I'm also giving them the commands because I want to conduct my class as much as possible in the target language. And I can't do that if I have to give them instructions in English. So one way that I start out by leading them into transitioning them into all Spanish or French is that I tell them right in the beginning, you know, once we learn these commands, you won't be hearing them anymore in English. So they focus. This is a good kind of tension now. And I keep reminding them, now remember that once we have learned all the commands, I'll be giving you the commands from now on in Spanish or French. And so they're preparing themselves. But it is very, very fun, and it is comprehensible input. And this is how I do it. I start out by commanding myself. And so they watch me. I command myself, siéntense, levanten la mano, escriban, etc. And I give them 5 or 6 at a time, and then I command them, but I'm still doing it. So there's no tension there, no anxiety. And then little by little, I stop doing it and just commanding them until I see that they're comfortable with it. And then we play games with it. I divide the class, equipo A, equipo B, and I give commands to team A and to the entire class. And I have someone helping me to judge the opposite team, and then we switch to keep it honest. So I'll say, levántense, and then the whole class will stand up, and the class that stood up the fastest, the team that stands up the fastest gets the point. And I'll do that for several weeks. And then finally, when I can tell that they know it in their sleep, then I will give them individual competitions on the 3, 4. So this side, they're numbered 1 to 15. This side, they're numbered 1 to 15. I'll give a command, and then I will give it again. I'll repeat it, and then I'll wait. And then I'll say a number, numero 11. And then the individual student who obeys the fastest gets the point. So that's strategy and activity number 1. Okay, number 2, the second way that I provide comprehensible input to my students. Very important, visuals, posters, labels. Images are so important. So I was talking about how I want my students I want to lay a foundation so that my students can be functioned, so my class can function in the target language mostly, 90 to 100% of the time, and usually 100%. And the way I do that is after I teach them the commands, then they need to be able to refer to all of the items in the classroom that they can see and that they'll be using. So I teach all the classroom objects, un lápiz, un bolígrafo, la pizarra, un libro, etc. And I put posters or labels all around on each item. So they're there for easy, quick reference. And I do the same with the high frequency words that they'll be needing. If you walk in my classroom, you can see them all over the place on all of the walls, word walls. Then I talk about them, just hold a conversation because they don't know how they're pronounced. And I'll go around and point to them and then talk about them in complete sentences. Necesito una grabadora para mis papeles, uso un lápiz para escribir, etc. Then I use PowerPoint with lots of photographs, captivating images. I work really, really hard to find an image, first of all, that represents the item exactly so that there's no guesswork. That's really hard to do. And then something that's eye-popping as well. And then I use visuals again for comprehensible input. My students love this game where they pair up and they all have the objects. And then it's very listening. So it's a listening activity. So I say the object in a sentence, a complete sentence, and then the first one who grabs it gets the point, and I'm using the visuals on the PowerPoint. After they grab the point, I show them which one it is. And then I also use another paired activity which has images on it. So students are saying, pues, I'm not, sí, I'm not, I'm marcador, no, I'm marcador. But visuals are very important, especially in the beginning when students have very little or no vocabulary. So putting words into complete sentences, this is a little difficult at first for them to understand. And it is comprehensible, even if it's not in a sentence, if it's comprehensible, if it's understandable. Well, this is labeled una silla, oh, must be a chair. So, back to the images in the PowerPoints, I use PowerPoints a lot. And I begin my lesson a lot of times with PowerPoints. As I said, I spend hours and hours looking for just the right image to represent whatever verb or noun that I want to convey the meaning of. And also I try to make it very artistic and very eye-popping. It could take me a month to make one PowerPoint. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you because I want to show you an example of what I mean by engaging images. It's a PowerPoint that I show for the places vocabulary. It's got animation. So you start out and you can see what it is. You don't have to guess. And it also draws your eye in. And I start off with the word, and then we go to complete sentences. So they see it and hear it in context. Okay, there you go. Okay, now your students know all items, the vocabulary for all the items in your classroom. Now I'm going to number 3. One of my favorite ways to provide comprehensible input, storytelling. So first of all, I act out the vocabulary with the students. TPR. TPR originally stood for total physical response. And I love that. I still love that because the more body parts students are using and the more senses they're using, the more engaged they are, the more likely they are to acquire the language, for it to stick. So I tell stories, and after we act out the vocabulary, if it's a really long list of vocabulary, I will put students in pairs so they don't get bored, and I'll have one student say the word and the other student will act it out, and then they'll switch, and then we'll go back to all classroom acting it out, and then I tell the story and the students help me tell the story. We act it out, and I bring up volunteers, and it's really funny. And I have 3 stories, they're very silly, that incorporate tons of vocabulary words for the classroom objects. The sillier the better, because that fulfills the compelling part. Now, I'd like to tell you another way to tell a story. Blaine changed the meaning of TPR, now it's TPRS, to teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. And in the example I'm going to show you, students are reading, listening, and getting cues from visuals. So I'm going to show you how to tell a story using visuals and asking questions. Okay, so la historia de Felipe y Paco. Felipe está en su clase de matemáticas. So I'd start with yes or no questions. Felipe está en su clase de inglés? No. Felipe está en su clase de historia? No. Felipe está en su clase de matemáticas? Sí. Felipe está en su clase de música? No. And then either or questions. Felipe está en su clase de matemáticas o en su clase de historia. And then they finish the sentence. Felipe está en su clase de... And then interrogative questions. ¿En qué clase está Felipe? ¿Está en su clase de...? No entiende el problema. Está confundida. Yes or no. ¿Está emocionada? ¿Está alegre? ¿Está triste? ¿Está confundida? No entiende el problema. ¿Está confundida o está alegre? Finish the sentence. Felipa está... Interrogative questions. ¿Cómo está Felipe? ¿Está confundida? ¿Cómo está? ¿Está emocionada? And from the point of view of the teacher, this gets really boring. You just want to get on with the story, right? But from the point of view of the student, they need that repetition and context or it won't stick. Luego está aburrida. Same thing. Yes or no. Either or. Finish the sentence. This is called recycling the vocabulary. And then at the end, the vocabulary and the concepts will be recycled again, more repetition and context with the activities. Su amiga Elisa le pasa una nota. Es de Paco. Ella lee la nota. Paco quiere salir con ella. Felipa está emocionada y alegre. Ella dice que sí. And now she's getting ready for the date. Está lista. Oh no! Pero ella ve a Paco con otra chica. And this is where the compelling part comes in. There always has to be a conflict to keep it interesting. Okay. So it's getting heating up now. So that's an example of how to use visuals and asking questions to recycle the language and give lots and lots of repetition in context. I have a video tutorial in which I tell a story using the TPR storytelling strategies and the questions, just like I did in the previous story. But in the video tutorial, I'm using the same pace I would use in an actual classroom setting, so you can see how it is fleshed out in a typical classroom setting, even though there is another teacher helping me. And you will see that from the point of view of the teacher, it is so boring. But again, the students, for them, it's not boring. They need that repetition in context. And I will provide that link on the document with all the other links. Number 4, of course, we're going to progress from short stories to longer stories and books and novels. So some of the activities that I have assigned to students for the longer stories are, I will take out some of the parts, some words, some expressions, some parts, and then they write in something different, and it can be really funny. But it is comprehensible input because I've already told the story, we've already acted it out, we've already done activities. So this is more repetition, but they're just changing it. It can be really hilarious. I also have them write their own ending. We will read a little bit of it, but not the ending. And then they'll write the ending, and that they think is the ending, and then we'll read it and they'll see the real ending. Or write the next chapter. Or I also give them a list of events, major events, or quotes people have said, or dialogue, and then they put them in the proper order. Here's one that students love: strip stories. Now, it's a little bit of prep for the teacher, if you have a TA, would help a lot. I would have my TA cut out the strips. So what it is you put the main events of the story in strips and leave sections between the strips so that you can cut them out, and then you mix them together. You put students into groups, and then they put them into the proper order. And I have the master list proper order with me, and I walk around and I say, yes, you got it, or no, keep working, of course, in the target language. And then the first 3 or 4 groups that come up with the right order get a prize. Now let's talk about books and novels. Did you know you can get free books and readings online at librosdemario.com and serieleamos.com. I'll give you the links. Now, when I assign a novel or a book, first I give students a list of vocabulary, because if I don't, they'll be spending all their time looking up words and they won't enjoy reading, and I want them to enjoy reading. So I put it in alphabetical order so that they can easily find the word they need. I put synonyms and words in context to help them understand. And I read with them in class, and I shelter the language. What does that mean? That means as I'm reading it, I read it slowly, of course, and then I do everything I can to help them understand what it means. I stop when words I think they don't understand to either act it out or give a synonym or explain it any way I can. And I've even said, okay, what words don't, read a few paragraphs, tell me what words you don't understand. And for advanced classes, I will do that for the first few chapters, and then I will assign the rest of the chapters periodically, little by little, and give them comprehension questions for homework, and then I'll give them a quiz at the end. I'll have students write the next chapter, summarize the chapter. For AP Spanish, for telenovelas, also do this, and for books, I have had the students choose a character and do a journal entry from the perspective of that character. What were they thinking? There are a lot more ideas on Mis Clases Locas blog, and I will share the link to her blog post. She has a ton of ideas. So now you're probably wondering, well, what books can I assign? For my advanced classes, Spanish 4 and AP, I have assigned Cajas de Cartón and Senderos Fronterizos by Francisco Jiménez. Honestly, I had a really hard time finding any books for the lower levels. I did try one short book on their level for Spanish 1, and it was boring. It just was not compelling, and I thought, if I'm bored, they're bored, and they were bored. And so Allison has some suggestions on her website, so make sure to check that out. So books and novels are great comprehensible input. Number 5, my very favorite, videos. If you want students, 100% student participation, put a frame around your head and pretend they're watching TV. They love videos, and the best ones, in my opinion, are the ones with native speakers, so that they hear authentic language, and also with the subtitles, the captions at the bottom, because this is not an assessment, this is comprehensible input, and being able to read it as well as hear it helps students understand it. And I'm going to show you, I've created many videos for students and at their level so that they can understand it in context. And here's an example of one for clothing.
Oh, mira este suéter. ¿Te gusta? No, no me gusta. No está de moda.
Bueno, a mí sí me gusta.
¿Te queda bien?
No, no me queda bien.
¿Qué talla eres?
Uso talla 3.
Mm,
Oh, pero mira este suéter. ¿Te gusta?
sí, está bonito.
Sí, a mí también me gusta.
¿Te queda bien?
Sí, me queda muy bien.
There are quite a few videos for free that you can find, and on the blog post, I give you links to them. And you can also find many, many videos on Edpuzzle. If you haven't used Edpuzzle before, you must try it. Number 6, objects and realia. There's something about something concrete that you're holding in your hand that makes an impression on the mind. When I teach the food vocabulary, I have plastic fruits and vegetables. When I teach the clothing, I drag in my huge suitcase full of all of the, just jam-packed full of all of the clothing, and I pick them up and I talk about them. It allows me to use the words in context. I try them on. I have students come up and try them on. When I teach the reflexive verbs, same thing. I drag in my suitcase full of all of the objects that you would need for your daily routine, and I talk about them, and I use a lot of the words in context, in sentences, and uso el peine para peinarme el pelo, etc. And then when I teach the double object pronouns and I tell the story about the student who stole the teacher's osito, and then how it goes from person to person. I have this big fat teddy bear, and we pass it around and we throw it around, and se lo da Ana se lo echa a Barbara, etc. So objects and realia. Number 7, teacher talk. I love teacher talk because it allows me to connect to my students, and they're very interested in your life. For example, when I'm teaching family, I bring in all the pictures of my family, or put them up on the screen, and I talk about my family. These are my 4 sisters. This sister is like this sister is like that. Here's my dad. And when I talk about clothing, I describe what I'm wearing. When I teach imperfect preterite, I tell stories about my childhood and things that happened to me in the past, and with visuals if possible. One time I have a story about something horrible that happened to me when I was climbing Mont Saint-Victoire when I was in France. So that's teacher talk, and just basically having a conversation with your students. And on the level, knowing that it's comprehensible input, that it's not above their level. Number 8, total physical response, TPR, I referred to that earlier. And I'm going to lump in anything that uses the body or other senses, because the more of the body parts and the more of the senses that you can use, the more engaged students will be, the more they will acquire the language. So acting out the words or the phrases and having them mimic you, that's a good way to introduce vocabulary. And something else I do is the vocabulary board game, which is excellent comprehensible input. I put the words on the board in all different colors, and then I will talk about that word. And the students, there's one student on each side at the back of the room. And then after I have finished describing this word, then they run up and they touch the word that they think I'm referring to. So TPR, number 8. Number 9, games. Games are great comprehensible input. They not only provide repetition and context, but they fulfill the compelling part because they're so fun. So, and you want your students to be engaged and happy to be learning. Bingo games, if done properly, and by properly, I mean using the vocabulary in complete sentences and providing repetition and context. So reading the script as the students play. And now there are also digital versions. I've created many digital versions where all the teacher has to do is walk around because the students just click a button and the audio script plays and they play that way. And Simone Dice is a great one for when you're teaching the body parts and health. Totally fun and a lot of repetition and context. Pictionary, again, is excellent if done properly with complete sentences. And the teacher talks and the students draw, and they love it. Jeopardy, again, it's a great game if their vocabulary is in complete sentences. Digital escape rooms are wonderful. Well, the students pay to play them, they love them. And in order to escape, they need to understand the directions and all of the activities. So that's it for number 9. Number 10, audio. Audio is great comprehensible input, and I've created one for you for free. It's for Spanish 1, weather vocabulary. And when you read the blog post, you'll get the link. There are Spanish proficiency exercises for all levels. I've used that often, and students understand it. It's authentic Spanish.
Me gustan todos los deportes, pero especialmente la natación. Normalmente nado 2 o 3 veces por semana.
There's news in slow Spanish for all levels. Did you know that? And then I've often used Vertal ejercicios de escucha for my advanced students, and I assign it for homework, and they have comprehension questions. And some of these have the script also. You can assign it with or without the script. I have them listen first without, and then if they have trouble, then they look at the script. Either way, it's really good comprehensible input.
Para contemplar y entender Medellín, es preciso subirse a uno de los múltiples cerros que la rodean. Situada a lo largo del fértil valle de Aburrá, la ciudad está sentada en un plano inclinado.
Number 11, memes, cartoons, and jokes. I love to start out my lesson with a meme. On the level of students, of course, I have 100 memes in Spanish for free. It was really hard. It took me years to accumulate those because students don't have the vocabulary to understand most memes. And I also have some for Spanish 3 that are free. And I have a link to my Pinterest board with a lot of chistes and memes, which you can find on the blog post. Number 12, graphic organizers. Venn diagrams are great. You just put your graphic organizer up on the screen and then you talk about your topic. I use the Venn diagram for la presentación oral for AP Spanish. I use a T for comparisons also. One time I had my students write a T graphic and then I compared 2 people. It was actually a true story. I said, you guys have to help me decide whom to marry, Jorge or Tomas. And so I gave talked about Jorge in complete sentences and wrote down all of his qualities. And then I talked about Tomas in complete sentences and wrote down his qualities. And then, of course, their defects as well. And then I said, well, now you have to help me decide whom to marry and tell me why. So that was all comprehensible input, repetition and context. And by the way, I didn't marry either one, in case you were wondering. And number 13, I have saved best for last. Can you guess what it is? Songs. Students love songs. That definitely fulfills the compelling part, unless you happen to choose an old folky song like I did once and never used again. But here are a few that I've used. Jessie y Joy, Ya no quiero, for the imperfect preterite. And I'm sure there are many, many more. There is actually a list of songs that someone generated. I don't know who did. I can't find the name. If it's you, please let me know so that I can give you the credit. But I will provide the link She provided it for free, and it has a list of many, many songs and who sings it, what country they're from, and what grammatical or vocabulary concept it's linked to so that you can teach it when you teach that concept. It's a great list. And the lyrics training is a good tool if you would like to use lyrics training for comprehensible input. I'm going to provide the link so that to the blog post that explains how to use it. What I do for songs, and there are many, many activities, possible activities you could use, but I have them listen several times, and then I have them fill out a cloze activity with words missing. So it's good for listening comprehension. And then I usually do a competition, team A against team B, and see who sings it the best. So songs are wonderful, comprehensible input. Thank you for attending this session. I hope you found a few activities and strategies for providing comprehensible input to your students, and make sure to check out all the links to get the most out of it. And also, if you have any questions, I'm very happy to help you. I will provide my email address also so that you can contact me with any questions that you have. Adios. Au revoir.